So I wanted to do a little East-West comparison today. I'm going to be relying pretty heavily on a text called Heidegger, Rorty, and the Eastern Thinkers, A Hermeneutics of Cross-Cultural Understanding by Wei Zhang. Um, so basically what I want to see is if there are any parallels that we can draw between Western philosophy and, um, as the title says, Eastern thought, because to even call it Eastern philosophy or Eastern religion or Eastern uh, whatever, it sort of does, as Rorty says, epistemological violence to it, because it's trying to put it into these Western frameworks that it really isn't meant to be put into. So Rorty really thinks that this kind of comparison is impossible because for him, he sees philosophy as this peculiarly Western Greek tradition um, that has really it's reduced the life worlds to this collection of abstract concepts. Um, so Rorty isn't even sure if there is such a thing as philosophy in Asia, and again he thinks to try to put Eastern text into a Western category is to do epistemological violence to it, um, and a large part of Rorty's thought is that the Western philosophical tradition needs to end basically, and it has already ended, and that we need to begin having just a conversation with each other now about how to make life better and more understandable, etc. And um, what this book Heidegger wrote in the Eastern Thinkers is trying to do is to try to open up Western philosophy's monologue with itself to a dialogue with the other, with the East, with some tradition that's wholly different from itself. So, because we see with the Greeks really began science, um, which is basically science is the work of intelligence, which seeks knowledge for its own sake. Whereas in the East, Asia never developed anything like science. Um, Instead, they involved their intellect in practical matters or mystical fancy and spirituality and things of that matter. So um, the West is basically focused on knowledge as theory, whereas the East is focused on knowledge as life interest. But obviously, in the 20th century, with the rise of existentialism, and even going back to the 19th century with Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, of course, we see this is sort of the end, the collapse of the Western tradition of knowledge as theory, collapsing in upon itself, which is why Rorty wants to just end the notion of Western philosophy altogether, because he sees it as a dead project. Um, So, a good way to see a big distinction between Western and Eastern thought would be to talk about language, because traditionally, for the West, language was seen as a way of accurately describing the world. If we go back to the early 20th century uh, philosophy of logical analysis, um, that Wittgenstein's Tractatus led to. The idea was that each proposition has meaning and is true based on its isomorphism with a state of affairs in the world, and that it is the job of philosophers to go through all of our language and use of language and to pin down what sentences have meaning and what don't, and which don't, and that's a kind of very scary kind of positivism as far as I'm concerned, but that's the tradition in the West. It's this mind-body dualism where language as the mind attempts to know the world as an objective, external, um, self-abiding existence, and that we have to uh, accurately picture the world in words in order to understand it correctly. Whereas in the East, um, there's this anecdotal story about this Chinaman named Fu Xi, who invented supposedly the Chinese writing system by tracing the path of birds across the sky and the footprints of animals on the ground. So the Chinese character system, unlike the alphabet, which abstracts from the sound of spoken words, is an imitation of nature. So in this sense, it's more gesture-based than Western language. Whereas the Western language tries to photographically represent the world, the Eastern languages are more gesture-like. They're more embodied. They try to be an embodiment of the world as perceived, instead of this objective representation of the world. So, with the rise of existentialism in the 20th century, Heidegger, for example, we see that language is starting to be conceived in this new way. Even the later Wittgenstein saw language in this new way. Instead of seeing it as a logical picturing of the world, language became the meaning of a proposition was its use, and all of a sudden the context becomes more important than the actual words that you're using themselves, because the background of the situation is and what the words do in the situation, what job do they get done in the world, if a gesture is an embodied communication, it's action and description at the same time. So Heidegger had some really beautiful metaphors for language. He said, language is the flower of the mouth. In language, the earth blooms towards the clouds of the sky. He also said that language is the house of being. And in this sense, language is always ahead of us. Even thinkers and poets are the custodians of language, as Heidegger put it. They don't create what they write. They let it be. They let it come out of them. So, language, for Heidegger, it shows and lets the world appear by hinting at it. So, spoken language then carries a meaning more essential than written language, because it rings and vibrates in the world. It's out there in the physical world. It's almost, when you speak, you're almost creating objects that are right there before you, and that others must pay attention to. If you speak, others will hear, and it's there. The words are there, verifiable.